and fly away with me. Come and fly away with me. Come and fly away with me. Come and fly away.
Hi, I'm Laura,
And I'm Jessica,
and welcome to No Man, No Man.
a podcast about international teaching, travel, and life.
We met in our undergrad music program in Minnesota, and now we're both international music teachers.
I just got done teaching in Almaty, Kazakhstan, and this fall I'm transitioning to teaching in Panama City, Panama.
And I just finished working in Turkmenistan, and now I'm going to teach in China.
Mm-hmm. Something I wanted to add this week is, since it will probably change eventually once we're out of quarantines and this pandemic, is Laura, where in the world are you right now?
I am in Rochester, Minnesota. And where are you in the world right now, Jessica?
I am in the burbs of Minnesota.
Cool. So this week we're going to tell our stories of trying to get home from the countries that we were living and working in during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. And then we'll take a little bit at the end to answer a question that our friend Rachel asked us about how to meet people and friends when you're living in a foreign country.
Mm-hmm. And how to have friends that aren't just from school.
We need to talk a little bit about just like when we found out our schools were closing, and I guess that timeline.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Laura, you found out a little bit earlier than me, so
yeah, sure.
You want to start that off?
Yeah, so it's funny because, China was trying to tell everyone in like December, and then most countries just blew it off. And then in January, February, it started traveling more to other countries from like probably holiday travel and stuff. And so basically what happened with our school was, so this will be a lot of extra information, but it is relevant. In the country that I worked in Turkmenistan, they don't have like what we would consider mainstream standards for medical care. So if there was a serious injury, accident, disease, normally you would just go to another major city nearby, like Dubai or Istanbul, which is normally not a big deal because it's like 1.5 to 3 hour flight, and the insurance covers like I think you could get like medevac there basically. So normally it's not a concern. We're covered in the ways of safety. But then since more countries were making restrictions on travel, we were worried about our airport already closing down or having limited flights. And some people had heard different stories about medical emergencies happening in this country for expats and people like me. And basically, we were worried that if there was a major injury, even if it wasn't coronavirus, that we wouldn't be able to get medevac because the government wouldn't let those emergency vehicles land. That's just like the nature of the government there. So then some people raised concerns to the director, and he started to file to the headquarters a request for us to be voluntarily evacuated, or just like to be able to leave and go home without breaking our contract. So that process to get it.
So your school hadn't made it. Sorry, I think there's sort of a delay just in the internet.
Okay.
So your school hadn't made any announcements about going online or anything at this point yet?
No, because it was like mainly a concern for the expats, because we knew we had a lot of older staff. I think a lot of international schools have older staff that are like, if anything happens to them, they're going to have to leave the country. And if they can't leave the country, or they can't get evacuated for whatever reason, then it says in our contract that we will receive like adequate medical care. And that clause became super important in making this decision from headquarters.
Right.
So then after basically like 3 weeks, it was a super long time, they said, yeah, you can leave, but like you have to pay for your own flight. You have to figure your own way out. And you have to obviously keep the same responsibilities that you would as a normal teacher. So once we got that okay, we had a bunch of meetings. Every single day we had a meeting, and it would be super last minute, and they'd be like, hey, there's a meeting today. And we're like starting to just expect it about how everything was going to work with online teaching, getting home, booking flights, all of this stuff. And we usually have someone else book local flights, since like most people don't speak Russian or Turkmen. So then there was like one lady at school who was going to book all of our flights and all that. So that was basically the timeline. I think it was early to mid March when we started to tell parents that, you know, we might not be there for the rest of the school year.
Yeah, I think yours was, I don't know, like in the early teens of March, because I knew you guys were doing some sort of something and our school was still trying to figure it out. So yeah, I'm going to talk a tiny bit now. I guess, I mean, it was similar. It was, I mean, we knew that there were cases now in Kazakhstan and in Almaty where I was teaching, but they hadn't really made any announcements yet. But I guess it was, we had like 1 week before our spring break. So this is the week before that week. So I guess like a week and a half to spring break. And we had parent teacher conferences. And I remember we have like a half day on Thursday. So you like release at like noon and go to parent conferences. And then on Friday morning, you have parent conferences. And then you have like the day off, I guess, because you work till 6 p.m. on Thursday. But yeah, I just know finally that was like when they made the announcement that we were going online, because the government had made a decision that there couldn't be like large group gatherings, and they had decided that local schools were going on an extended spring break for like 3 weeks with the plan of coming back. But I mean, that obviously didn't happen. We could initially, once they made that, I think your school having the like voluntary evacuation helped. So we were technically able to leave if we wanted to, but it was kind of stressed to us, like we're responsible to get back if school opens up, and we don't know how long this is. And it was kind of under the impression in all of Kazakhstan that we would maybe be coming back in like April or May. I don't know why. I mean, obviously, like in retrospect, looking back on it now, that was like silly to think. But we had thought, oh, we'll be close for like a month or like a month and a half and we'll come back. So I really struggled to make a decision if I even wanted to leave or not. And I mean, several of my coworkers ended up getting out, and like I was finally looking at one flight, but that one ended up getting canceled, and basically like there weren't really any more international flights. So by that point, kind of my mind was made up for me, because like I'm like you, I was leaving for good. Like if I left and school didn't reopen, I had to plan as if I wasn't returning and bring everything with me. So it was a pretty big decision to go.
Yeah.
But anyway, I ended up riding out the quarantine in Kazakhstan until I finally left in June. Yeah.
That's exciting.
Maybe
well, kind of.
Yeah, it was real exciting. I think maybe we can talk like a little bit about like how quarantine was in these countries, and then talk about our wild long trips home.
Yeah. And I want to go back and reiterate, because I was listening to yours. So your government made the decision kind of for you and like did it based on coronavirus, right?
Right. And then, I mean, yes. And so then after the extended like spring break for the local schools, they ended up saying that they were out until, I don't know, some arbitrary date, and like the country was in lockdown until this date, but the date kept getting pushed back and back. And like finally, I think in like May or something, the local schools said they would be out for the whole rest of the year. And I mean, our school kind of followed what the local government and local schools were doing, though. I mean, it took a few days or like week or so after the local schools made their announcements for us to, because it's going through a lot of people and like headquarters in this big organization. But basically by the time it got to, I don't know, mid-April or something, it was just like we're closed until further notice. So we didn't really even into like June, we didn't really have a date like in place. And like I said, there were days when like the lockdown was supposed to be lifted, but it still didn't mean that schools could be open. So yeah, it was just a long like waiting around to see nothing. I mean, when we got into the beginning of June and we're making plans, or like the end of May and making plans for distance graduation, then it's like, yeah, obviously we're not coming back now, you know.
Because basically, I think, I don't know if I said this like clearly, but ours it didn't start as because of coronavirus. It started because the airports were shutting down, and some people didn't want to say it was because of the virus because we hadn't had like confirmed cases or whatever. So basically we just said like for the safety of whatever. So even when we were telling parents like basically all of your expat teachers are leaving, and they said, why? There's no virus here. And we're like, yeah, but it's not even about that. Like officially it's not about that, because it's about the safety anyway. And it did end up being because of it, but it also wasn't.
In like a roundabout way. There weren't confirmed cases, and the airports were closing likely behind the scenes because of it. Or because the countries they were going to like are now closed, so you can't enter or whatever.
So there was that. And then what else was I gonna say? We had basically the same timeline as you, which is funny because I heard from other schools in our company and outside that they were screwed because of just the school calendar. But we had, so yours and my spring breaks were like 1 week apart, I remember. But it was the same situation where we had conferences right before the spring break. And then we actually used the day after conferences, we had another half day that was literally just for answering parents' questions and trying to make them feel okay that all of their teachers were leaving the country.
It was weird. I think we had meetings like, because that Friday morning, it was like 8 to noon or 9 to noon, we had like conferences, and then they had like 3 meetings back to back, which the specialists were all in the library, and that's where the meetings were, so I got to hear the same meeting 3 times.
Nice.
But anyway, so it was like kind of weird because some parents had like heard word of it, and like it was really interesting. Like it would have been nice to have like one normal day of school to like send kids home with stuff, but we really didn't have that.
We did have a precursor, like, because like you said, like kind of parents of certain kids started finding out and whatever. So like I think it was 1 week before we had the meeting saying officially a lot of teachers will be leaving. We got the kids onto Microsoft Teams at school in the lab during class time and helped them log in and taught them their passwords. And like most schools didn't get anything like that. So we were really lucky to have stuff like that.
We had that week that we had the like conferences, we had all of elementary and middle school did like practice online days. So they went to their classrooms, but they were supposed to just log on and do assignments online. So they had like a practice day. The high school didn't, but they're high schoolers and they were all hooked up on, that stuff. before, so that was helpful for sure.
So you want to talk about the quarantine stuff, like in our countries?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like what was what?
Well, if I'm just gonna give like a
Like
little
what?
bit.
Yeah, like what were you allowed to do and not do, etc.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna give a little bit of my perspective, but if anyone listening wants the full unadulterated edition, you can just kind of Google it and read between the lines. But basically, we didn't have a quarantine. We never had a quarantine, and they're just starting a lockdown now. And it's not even officially for any one thing. It's just like for the general health and safety of our citizens. So
Yeah, were like restaurants and things like
everything
closed,
was
or
open.
like did you notice people like wearing masks or like
No,
anything different?
no. Everything was the same in the local community. In the
Wow.
expat community, people were told to act like they would if they were living in the States. So stay at home and only go out for essentials. There was
Right.
one time, it was a couple of days before we ended up actually leaving, that we heard that due to a holiday, but actually just not for a holiday, they were going to close grocery stores indefinitely. Like someone just said that
Wow.
and it got around. So we went shopping that day and like planning to stock up on stuff because we were like, what the heck? Like, I don't know if this is true or not, but you have to buy something. And I'm like,
Yeah.
how much do you buy for? Like, if it's for 2 weeks or 3 days or whatever. So we just like, I spent a lot of the rest of my local currency and I was like exchanging money like once a week at this point, which is pretty weird for me. And then we had all this food, and then the grocery stores didn't close, and everyone was acting normal except at the grocery stores people were panicking, like probably how it was here in the US, except no one was talking about it. They were just like casually buying 10-pound bags of rice.
Yeah. No, I definitely remember, well, it was weird because like the lockdown hadn't like really started yet, but like schools were closed and like things were gonna start to be closed. So like that weekend, but like between us announcing and like the next week was like bizarre because and again, like in retrospect, this is so dumb, but me and my friend were like thinking in our heads, like stupidly, we're like, oh, like we'll be able to like go to a coffee shop and like work online and like I
Yep.
don't know what we were thinking, and
We
like
thought
go to
that too.
movies and like why did I think that? I don't know. Like
Yeah.
it was completely unrealistic. But anyway, that weekend was weird because we had our staff party that weekend.
Oh yeah.
So we like all got together. And then also because we were closing down, we did go grocery shopping, and like I said, it was weird. Like everything was still open, and I mean there wasn't shortages of anything, but I do remember like seeing people literally buying ginormous bags of like potatoes and rice and like onions and things. We have like a sort of like a Costco type place, I guess. So like it was just bizarre to me. I guess there was just more people than normal, but yeah. And then we did actually go into quarantine, and I don't remember the exact, like, I think it started off like a little bit lighter, but then it got a little bit harsher where you could only go so many miles from your house. And you had to wear a mask if you were leaving your house. Even if you're like outside on the street. Because a lot of people walk around, especially in like the villages or like smaller areas. So you had to be wearing a mask. You'd only go so many miles from your house. So we were really like limited on anywhere we could go. Honestly, I didn't really leave like hardly ever. And when I did, it was just to go to the tiny grocery store by my house. I delivered a lot of Papa John's and Italian food and KFC and McDonald's, like, hallelujah.
Yeah.
Ordered in so much food, found out to order in a foreign country for delivery, so that's cool. Ordered
Yeah.
groceries. Yeah, so I really honestly, like, didn't leave. I lived this past year at school, so there's, like, some apartments in the gates of the school campus. So yeah, it was weird to like be at school for months, seeing my school, and not like have kids there and not really be able to leave.
Yeah. We had one thing that started to change. So because we bought all these groceries thinking any day now grocery stores could close, like we had no idea what was going on. And there
Hmm.
wasn't really a chain of communication except for like my boss calling me and saying, go buy groceries. So
Yeah.
we bought all these groceries and then things didn't shut down. So we weren't really sure what was going to happen. So we got non-perishable items mostly so that if something happened,
Right.
it'd be good for a long time. So then because nothing was shut down still, we pretty much went out to eat for 1 to 2 meals a day so that we weren't getting into our stock of food. And so
Yeah.
we would basically just go to like the 3 restaurants that were close to us in case something
Hmm.
got shut down or they closed the
Hmm.
roads or something. So towards the end of me being there, some of the people at this one restaurant started wearing gloves and mandatorily sanitizing everyone's hands when they came in. And this was
Mm.
still at the point when they said there's no confirmed cases of virus.
Right.
So one of my friends who likes to ask questions and sometimes uncomfortable questions was asking them why they're doing this and didn't say anything. They're just like, oh, that's new. Like, why are you wearing gloves now? And they're just like, oh, for hygiene. We're like, why are we only being hygienic now in 2020? Why couldn't you have done this? So
Yeah.
we knew why it was, but they didn't want to say it. So
Yeah. Towards the end of me, I mean, like I said, I didn't leave a whole bunch, but towards the end of me being there, they started to like loosen things up, which was when I was able to finally leave. But even then, you could go like basically where you wanted, but like bigger organizations were closed. Like, I mean, obviously, like schools and like movie theaters and stuff. And they had like the temperature thing when you walked in the mall. But I mean, that was about it. And right after I left, they started going back into lockdown again. Um,
now we should talk about getting home.
yeah. Okay, so I mean, I guess that was like that with quarantine. Like, I can't really speak too much because I didn't leave a lot, but it
But
was
you
pretty.
were there for the end of school. You were there the whole school year
I
in the
was
country.
there the whole time. Yeah, but I didn't really want to live on campus.
Yeah.
Um, I did my first year. I moved off campus and then had to move back because they built a
Housing.
new housing unit, so they needed more people to live there. But it ended up being a blessing for this situation because being like at school, I had other people near me and I could like walk the track at school or like go in my classroom or things like that. Whereas if I was off campus, I would have been completely isolated for
Yeah.
months.
That was
So,
something that I went back and forth about once I got back to the States. I'm like, yeah, obviously I'm safe and it's great. And that should be the main concern. But when you break it down, it's like, oh, I wish that if I had stayed there, we would have all had some kind of community close there. And it didn't even feel like teaching like it used to.
yeah. Okay, so I guess now let's break down getting home. You
Yeah.
left maybe even like 2 months, a month and a half. When did you
Yeah.
leave before me?
I left on March 28th.
Yeah. You left almost 2 months before me.
Did you leave later or earlier than you had originally planned to leave for the summer?
I left maybe like 5 days early
Okay, so
than my
basically
original plan.
pretty close.
I left like on the teacher work day or like on the last day of school or something like that. But I had prefaced my kids and wrapped everything up. And
Yeah.
grades were actually due before then anyways. So
And you
yeah,
guys were online the whole time, right?
we were online the entire time.
Yeah.
Yep.
You never went back to school, face-to-face
No,
school. Okay.
no.
So yeah, so I'll talk about a little bit more about how I got home because that was a grand old
Yeah,
time.
you have some stories, right?
Yep. And there's actually an article. One of my colleagues was approached by a reporter, or maybe they sent in the story. I'm not really sure. But you can read their story if you want to just Google like Canadians leave Turkmenistan or something like that. It's kind of cute. But so basically, we knew that we had been given the okay to leave and it wouldn't break our contracts and all that. But we had to book our own flight out of one leg, like the biggest leg home. We had to book it ourselves instead of having the lady at school do it. So we did that. Most people were on this one flight. There was like three choices, and most people chose the middle one because they wanted some time to like pack up and say goodbye and stuff. So we got to the airport and it said on the screen that the flight was canceled. But in this country, we don't always want to think that what is printed is correct. So we went to the window for the office of the
Uh-huh.
airline and said, "Hey, this is canceled." That's kind of weird because like we have like 50 of our own employees on this flight and we just want to know, like, you didn't give us any advance notice. We showed up at the normal time that we would for the airport and it says no flight. So then we started, we had one person translate, but it was clear that it wasn't just going to be a cut and dry answer. So we called in some reinforcements and got a bunch of people from school that spoke 2 to 3 languages, and then the director, people in admin, just to help and explain to everyone, because some people weren't at the airport yet, some people were packing, some people were still deciding if they wanted to go on the flight. So
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, so it ended up that we didn't fly that day, and they said, you should come back tomorrow. We'll just count your ticket. Like if it says Thursday, we'll actually let you go on Friday because we just know the situation. And a lot of people were still really mad and wanted to be compensated for the inconvenience. So they promised like 50% off of our baggage fees and all this stuff. So
Okay.
then
Yep.
we came the next day, a little bit nervous, but it didn't say canceled on the TV. So we're like, okay, that's a good sign. We might get a little further than we did yesterday.
Yeah.
We went through bags. Everyone went together for the most part. Like we traveled as a group through the security and stuff. And then we got to the gate, and it was mostly people from our school and then a couple people from like other embassies, but they were basically all expats. And we waited there for quite some time. The plane arrived at the gate, and then the lights were on in the plane. There was some staff in there. Um, some of the flight attendants were just, milling about the airport, getting snacks. We were getting snacks. No one was at the gate desk, so there wasn't anyone that we could really ask questions to. But it was now an hour or so past when we were supposed to have boarded. And there were some
Okay.
delays through security and stuff because they were trying to do extra measures for safety. And like they took our passports at one point and then like wanted,
Yikes.
I
Yeah.
don't really know what they did with them, but we ended up getting them back. And so, yeah, we waited at the gate for a long time. I think it ended up being probably 6 or 7 hours after we should have left.
Jeez. Wow.
It was a
Okay.
long time. There's a lot of other information there, but basically, that flight did not leave. and we went home. And we were like, so are we leaving? When is this happening? Because that was supposed to be the last flight. And then they were shutting
Yeah.
down the international airport. And they
Mm-hmm.
did shut it down that day. So the people who chose the earlier flight, because remember we had 3 options, they got home just fine. And if we had known
Mm-hmm.
it was going to be the last flight, of course, everyone would have piled onto that
Well,
and made it
yeah.
work. But we thought we had choices. So
Right.
we didn't. So then we were just waiting to hear like what the next step was. The American embassy ended up getting a list of people together, and they were looking for options to charter a flight, to contact possibly other airlines that would be able to help us out. And I think it was maybe 2 weeks after that last flight, where we waited for a really long time and didn't go anywhere, that we got an email saying that there was a flight that we were going to charter. And if you wanted to get on it, you had to go to the embassy, sign some forms, and say that you were going to pay them once you got back into the States for your ticket. And
Okay.
then you would be allowed to go on the flight. They didn't have any information about baggage, pets. They didn't have an exact cost of the flight. But at this point, we were like, we have to get out, because I don't know when we're going to be able to get out if the traditional commercial airlines are not flying. So,
Right.
yeah, so we ended up leaving on that flight that was planned. It seemed pretty planned, and we signed all the papers and everything. We flew a domestic flight first, which was to a different airport. I still don't know why, but that was where the other airline planned to pick us up. So the airline that we chartered was Azerbaijani Airlines. They don't fly to Turkmenistan. They had no reason to be there. The plane was literally like, we just picked a plane and said, hi, would you please come get us? We'll pay you all the money.
Yeah.
Their staff, everyone in the airport, everyone on the plane was from Azerbaijan. So we got on that plane, and it was, what do you call it? It was a nonstop flight from Turkmenistan to DC. So
Okay.
because all of the countries that we would have flown over had their borders closed at that point, there wasn't a place that we'd be able to refuel. So we had to get a big enough plane that could go straight there without any stop.
Yeah.
So
How
we
long
got
was the flight then?
14 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Still shorter than what I would take to get to China. So it was nothing. And so it was a giant flight for the 100 people we had. Everyone was from the school or the American embassy or the Canadian embassy. So those were all the people that we had gotten on there, but yet we had this giant flight. So I got a row to myself. Everyone got a row to themselves unless they were in first class. You could move around, you could pick your seat, like literally do whatever you want, because we paid for the plane. So they didn't have any rules except, put your seatbelt on when you're asked and stuff like that.
Right.
So then from DC, we had booked a flight to Minnesota, and I don't think we had to rebook that one. We had to rebook so many other flights, but that time it was relatively straightforward, and we made it home, and the airport was completely dead and sanitized everything. They didn't have the like convenience stores open or anything. There was no place to get food. So that was interesting, but we made it.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, mine was different, but I mean, also
Yeah.
long.
Yeah.
I was trying to initially get out like earlier, like the beginning of June, but because we ended up leaving later and we knew like all of our flights were canceled, we had a travel agency in our company.
Mm-hmm.
So we were told to contact them to have them help us.
Mm-hmm.
But like the issue was they had been bought out by a larger company who is now helping us. And then all the employees that used to help us were now fired because of the pandemic. So it was like a bunch of people who weren't used to working with us. So it was taking a long, long time to even get answers from them. But basically, I ended up having like 3 or so flights that I booked that got canceled. Um, yeah. And it ended up with me just going around the travel company and asking for a refund and booking my own tickets. The Almaty airport didn't end up until after I left. I think they opened up a week or so after, but they didn't have any international flights out of Almaty or Nur Sultan, the capital. So I had to fly a domestic flight to get an international flight, which is maybe why you had to also or something. Maybe they technically weren't allowed to fly international or something.
Yeah, that's why, because the international airport in the capital was already closed.
Yeah. So, yes, with all of this, before I talk about my journey home, I was also bringing my lovely cat who is sitting next to me right now. But she is a very anxious cat, even just like taking her to the vet. I wanted to take her under the plane. I know, like, that's not wonderful to have them not with you, but for her, like, to be in this small cage that she couldn't stand up in, like, under my seat for almost 2 entire days seemed like a worse choice for her than having constant availability to her food and water and a bed and toys and being able to stand up and move around. Like, so I would have preferred to send her underneath, but I ended up having to take her with me in the plane because I think because of all of this, and I had to book through 2 different airlines, so just transferring to the different airline, it would have been a hassle too. So, all right, my trip home, beautiful, wonderful. So I have four flights.
Yay.
I know you had one long flight, but
well, technically 3, but
you had 3 flights, but one very long flight.
Yeah.
Normally I take 3 to get home. Normally I do from like Almaty to like somewhere in Europe to somewhere in the US and then to Minneapolis. But this time I had that extra flight. So I went from Almaty. Oh, by the way, sorry, I should preface this. No one else that I knew was on my flights. I was by myself. Because I'd been trying to like leave for so long, I just wanted to get on the next available one, and some other people wanted like another week to pack and plan. But I just wanted to get out, so I just kept rebooking, and I knew that this flight had taken off already, so whatever, I did it, and I was alone. So I did have our school driver take me to the airport so he could help like translate and make sure I got through everything that I needed to. So my first flight is from Almaty to Adarao, and it's the 3rd largest city, I think, in Almaty. And it's about a like 3-hour, 2-hour plane ride. And I had to take my cat through security, like hold her in my arms, walk through metal detector. Yeah, it was cute, other than that she's terrified.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got her an anti-stress collar that I don't think did anything. Anyway, so I got her through security, we waited, and finally we got on the first plane, which was taking off at like almost 3 a.m. So I'd already been up without sleep all night.
Love that.
And she was whining the whole time. And I don't know how they got away with this, but this first flight, it was full. There was like no social distancing. There like were people in every seat. And I just remember like getting on and them announcing in the intercom, like, be sure to keep 2 meters distance apart, which is like 6 feet. And I'm like, how? This person next to me is literally touching me because we're sitting right next to each other. So anyway, my poor cat and my poor neighbors around me, my cat is whining constantly. And finally, I think she has quieted down. I'm like, hallelujah, we're gonna make it home, it's gonna be fine. And I start to like bat my eyes closed to go sleep, because now it is like 4 or 4:30 a.m. But between my eyelashes batting closed, I see the stewardess walk past with a black fluffy cat, and I'm like, wow, that looks like my cat. And it was my cat. She had somehow ripped a hole in her kennel and escaped to the back of the plane. Yeah. So I was in the window seat, so I had to reach over these people and grab my cat, shove her back in the kennel, and maneuver the zippers over where the hole was so she couldn't get out. Thankfully, that was like the only time that she made a break for it. And then, of course, she continued to whine. Yeah, she basically on every flight whined almost the whole time at varying degrees of loudness. She did pretty well in the airports, I think, because I could prop her up and she was able to like see out. And I think just like the planes are loud, like it's so loud. So anyway, I get to Adderall and get on my next flight to Amsterdam. From there, yeah, again, she's whining. It's loud. It's great. Managed to get some sleep. And I just remember when I get to Amsterdam, we had to go through another customs because now I'm in the EU. And since she had escaped, she had like clawed at the inside of her kennel. And so they had to like swab her kennel and like check it. I'm like, oh no, it looks like I'm a drug smuggler because there's all these rips in this pet carrier. So I had to hold her extra long in the Amsterdam line. Yeah, basically, I mean, like, it was mostly business as usual. There were more things closed in these airports, and people were wearing masks, and there's like hand sanitation, and there's less people, but it was mostly business as usual. My other flights were varying degrees of distance. Like, at least there would be one seat between people, if not like 2 or 3. So, yeah, I mean, it was a relatively smooth ride there, like to Amsterdam, and then I went to Atlanta and then to Minneapolis. It was just with her, it was one of the most stressful things I've ever done in my entire life. I don't know, thankfully most bathrooms other than the US have like floor to ceiling like doors, so I was able to like let her out and get her some like water and stuff when I could in the airports. Yeah,
That's a
and
weird
when I was
route too. Just thinking about that. It's nothing similar to what you would normally have.
Well, KLM used to have a flight to Amsterdam from Almaty, so it's not super weird to go through Amsterdam, but I had never from Adderall. I've never been to Adderall. Yeah, and it was very stressful. I was very exhausted because it was almost 2 entire days. It was like takeoff to landing like 35 hours, I think. And that doesn't include like driving to the first airport, waiting at the first airport, driving home. And I just remember when I was getting off my like Atlanta to Minneapolis flight, there were some people that were complaining about my cat, and I had spent the better part of 2 days apologizing about my cat, and I had hardly slept, and it took everything in me to not turn around and yell at them, because I think they said something about like, why wouldn't you just drive if your cat's like that or something. They weren't talking to me. They were talking to each other. But they don't know where I'm coming from. So it took everything in me to not like turn around and yell at them. Like, I've been traveling for 48 hours. I didn't want to bring her in the like cabin, but I had to. It was that or leave her in a foreign country. She's never flown before. Didn't know how she'd act. Like, it took everything in me to not like cry or yell at them. But we both made it home, and that's that. This was in mid-June, by the way. I didn't say my timeline. So I spent March, April, May, June, almost 3 whole months, more than 3 months in quarantine lockdown in Kazakhstan, but made it home.
Cool. Yeah. Are they
Yeah.
now?
Huh?
Is Kazakhstan open now in any, like, are
Uh,
they still in lockdown or?
I think they opened up, and some of my friends were able to get international flights from Almaty without having to go
Okay.
to other cities. But I think shortly after we got back, I think like the end of June or beginning of July, they went back into lockdown
Okay.
and closed the airport again. So, yeah, it's a whole world of unknowns for a
It's so
lot of
crazy
people.
how, like, so many things had to line up perfectly for you and me to get home. Like, we just had to keep trying, and like it's already annoying enough to book any flight, and then to have to keep
Well,
rebooking the same flight. You're like, "Oh my
well,
God."
yeah. And like I said earlier, also like we are packing up our entire homes and
Yeah.
bringing everything we own with us. So
Oh
it's like
yeah.
already stressful to know that you're not returning to this place. You don't get to say goodbye to your students or some
Mhm.
of your friends or coworkers. Like, yeah, it was hard as is.
Yeah.
And then to add being during a pandemic and things being canceled and
Yeah.
made it so much harder.
I've like threw away most of my stuff too because I just
Oh,
knew there was no way I
yeah,
was going to be able to bring it. So,
yeah, I threw away, sold, and donated most of my things that
yeah.
I had. Yeah. Okay, I think we should really quickly jump into Rachel's question.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I don't need to go into detail too much on the things that I had written down about this or thought about for this. So, Rachel, to reiterate, since it's from the beginning of the podcast, asked us, like, how do we make friends and like do social things
We
in
don't.
foreign countries? So for me, honestly, though, my friends from home in Minnesota will say I'm like extroverted, but if you ask most of my like coworkers, they'll say I'm introverted. But I think it's just like situational things. There's so many unknowns in a foreign country, and like when I'm in Minnesota, I'm like in my element and like
Mhm.
know how to get
Know what the
around. So
culture is.
yeah, like I know the culture, I know how to get around, I know the language, so I can be outgoing and like have conversations with strangers and stuff. But
Yeah.
it's like everything's new, so I'm like more, maybe not introverted, but like hesitant or like reserved
Yeah.
when I'm overseas. So honestly, most of my friends are just my coworkers,
Yep.
100%. And the first week that I got to Kazakhstan, we had like orientation and stuff.
Mhm.
So my first friends were like the other new teachers, and we had spent time together. So,
Yeah.
I mean, and some of them, even since they've left, are still my friends now
Mhm.
because you really bond. It's almost like college 2.0.
Mhm.
You all are like doing orientation and stuff. But the other big things that I've like found um, to find friends overseas are there's a group called Internations, and it's in, if not every country in the world, like almost every country in the world. And they host events for expats, and it could be like at a bar, it could be just like a meet and greet, it could be like, I don't know, trivia, or they have different sorts of clubs, like a dinner club that goes out, or like a hiking club or a book club.
Mhm.
So you can become a member. There's like a fee. I think it's like $50 a year or something, but it pays for you to go to all these events.
Mhm.
And usually you get like free drinks or you get something. And yeah, so that's a great way to meet like other foreigners and not just like other Americans
Yeah.
in whatever city you're in. And then for me, we also had like I guess our like group of schools in Almaty that they would like play against each other in sports and like debate and things. It was called Coash. Um, yeah. Um, and anyway, they would also host like professional developments for our teachers at the different international schools.
Mm.
So we could go, and there would always be like a mixer, and you could meet other international teachers. So that was really good for me. Um,
Cool.
yeah. And then I put this under your name because I know you have different experiences with it too. But the consulate or like embassy and things also in a lot of countries will host events. Me personally, the consulate had like a trivia night once, and then one of our teachers, her husband worked at the consulate, and she ended up hosting like an Iron Chef thing. So we'd have an ingredient and we'd all cook something, and we got to meet people from the consulate as well as like other teachers and stuff who they knew. So just events through the consulate and embassy, I think, are also helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a lot. Well, we had some of the same stuff. We did have an
Mm-hmm.
Internations, which I was surprised by because we don't have any other international schools there, and we have pretty few international companies there. So I kind of thought I would already know who was there. And I went a couple
Mm-hmm.
times, but I went with friends I already knew. Just I feel like that's a little bit more comfortable than like
Yeah, I mean, I
completely
did the
alone.
same thing too. Yeah.
Yeah. So I went to a couple of those, but they did end up being like mostly either people I already knew from other events or like old European guys who just wanted to speak German and didn't really seem like my kind of friend vibe.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I
Right.
went to the things that were interesting, like if I wanted to do that activity. I didn't necessarily go to meet new people, but there's just not a lot to do in that city that's not started or run by an expat. So that was just a way that I got to do stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
actually, one of the main things of how I met friends was we had something called Wednesday night dinners, which one of my friends started because I don't know why. Oh, so it started where a bunch of people would just get together after our staff meeting because they were always on Wednesday and just like, hey, we've worked like an extra long day. Let's go out and get some drinks and food, and we don't want to cook. So it started out as that. Then it turned into always going to the same restaurant. So people would just call it like Zip night because the restaurant was called Zip. So they would just say,
Mm-hmm.
hey, we're going to be at Zip like every night pretty much for Wednesdays. So then my friend started making it more of an official thing and like trying to get people from the embassy or other friends that he had to come to Wednesday night dinner. And so then that happened and was established the year before I got there. And then the year that I got there, it was like not official, but as official as it could be, to where you knew every single week we would start going to different restaurants on Wednesdays, and like you could request like, oh, I think people would like to try this restaurant. And it was, you never really knew who was going to come. A lot of times it would be just people from school, but sometimes there would be embassy people, or sometimes we had people visiting from different countries, and we would just hear word of them, like a tourist being there, which
Yeah,
we don't have a lot of
that's
tourists, so
cool.
that was a crazy thing. So that was a big thing that we got to just keep our friendships if it wasn't even starting new friendships. Um, the consulate events you're talking about, so because the country I was in was more, it didn't have a bigger expat community. Basically, we had events by the school and events by the embassy. And there wasn't a
Mm-hmm.
lot of community events that I knew I would feel comfortable in because they were pretty much in Russian and it was a lot of local people. So I
Mm-hmm.
think the embassy started to realize that and like realize, hey, there's a lot of teachers here who don't really feel comfortable because there's not a lot to do. So I think we got invited to more stuff than we normally
Yeah.
would in another country.
Mm-hmm.
But you did have to get invited to most things. We also had something, oh, I remember, it's called a CLO, which is Community Liaison Officer. So that
Oh,
it's like just someone that works at the embassy.
we have something similar. So would be someone from the consulate that puts together like all the events happening
Yeah.
in the city for
Yeah.
like a week or the weekend, and then it ended up getting sent out to us at school. And I
Yeah.
just want to go back to like the embassy and consulate thing too.
Uh-huh.
Like generally a lot of the things they had were like dinners or like balls or like fancier things. So
Yeah.
like I didn't usually go, but yeah, we did usually need to get invites, but the school would get some invites, especially like the last year, whatever, that I was there.
Yeah.
And not only like the American embassy, but sometimes like the other embassies will invite you too. Like I know one of my friends was invited to like an Indian embassy like party,
Mhm.
and they had like food and stuff. So I mean,
Yeah.
that's possible as
Yeah.
well.
But yeah,
Mhm.
for the other embassies, like from other countries, you for sure have to get invited, and they don't just invite every teacher. Like if
Yeah.
you have their kid, they'll probably let the kid invite like a couple teachers, or usually just the homeroom teacher. So I only got invited to one thing, and I went. It was the Saudi Arabian World Day, or I forgot what it's called, dang it. But it's just like a celebration of their country and their country's progress with technology and stuff. And it was really cool. And I'm so glad that I got to go. It was amazing. But pretty much the events are like that I would actually go to from the embassy. They have a St. Patrick's Day, Oktoberfest, and the Marine Ball. And the Marine Ball is like the
Mhm.
super fancy one, like people
Yeah.
wear prom dresses and have like a 3-course meal and stuff. So I went to that one time, but it's kind of just something to go to and see what it is. It's not like
Yeah. I
awesome.
I almost forgot like my favorite thing. Well, I used to just like go out like dancing or like to karaoke, but
Uh-huh.
pre-quarantine.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can always just like go out too.
Yeah.
And then before I get to my most favorite thing, one more thing. There is also in Almaty, and I think a lot of places there's like International Women's Club. So it's like a group of women, and it's usually like wives of expats who like they don't have a job, or they're like stay-at-home moms, so they go out and do like community service or go hiking and things like that. So that's another way, depending on what your international journey is, to meet other people. But my most favorite thing that we found this year was like they did trivia, English trivia, and it was housed at the Hard Rock Cafe. So it
Nice.
was the highlight of my like meeting other people. I guess I would go with my friends, but like you would get to recognize
Yeah.
people or like the hosts and stuff. And
Yeah.
like I said, generally like my friends have been people that worked at the school with me. Although like my first year I had a couple other friends from outside of the school, but
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, and I would also just say like if you have a new job or whatever and you have those orientations, and like even if the beginning of the thing seems cheesy or it's not something you normally do, just like go.
Hmm. That was
And
the
you're gonna meet
best.
people.
Did you tell me that? It was like the best advice that I got was like just do every single thing that you get invited to for like the first couple months.
Yeah, like everything you get invited to the first few months, just go.
And
Because because like that's how you're
yeah,
gonna get
no, it
comfortable
is.
with people. If you don't go because you don't know them, you're never gonna know
Yeah,
them.
yeah,
So like yeah, just do a bunch of stuff like social stuff the first month or two. And
yeah.
yeah.
We just had such a small expat community that people started noticing, obviously, because I was like a new teacher, that I was going to every single thing. And then it was probably late October, early November before I actually skipped one. And
Whoa.
everyone was like, "Where were you? You come to everything." And I was like, "Yeah, that's why. I wanted one break."
Yeah, like I need me time
Yeah,
finally.
sometime, please.
Yeah. So
Okay.
if you have something that you would like to know, or a story like Laura said before that you'd like us to retell that you thought was comical or funny or something, please let us know on Facebook comments or on our Instagram at Nomads Podcast. Yeah. And again, if you have suggestions or questions, I think we're going to maybe try to do our general topic and then answer like one question from someone else, provided we have enough questions. Yeah. Or let us know directly if you know us.
Yeah, find us on the street 6 feet away and just say, "Hey!"
Right.
Talk about
Shout
this.
at us from outside our parents' homes.
Sure, why not? They'll love
For
it.
temporary housing in our parents' homes for the summer.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you for listening from wherever in the world you are.
Thanks again, and we'll catch you next time.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Come and fly